When Stuart Sutcliffe left the band, Beatles needed a bass player. Harrison had already been lead guitarist for some years at that point. It was understood that nobody particularly wanted to be the bass player, but if McCartney had attempted to bully Harrison into taking the job, Harrison would have resented it, and even if it had worked, they would have had a very resentful bass player on their hands. There's not many songs in the Beatles canon in which George Harrison played bass. He was certainly no Paul McCartney, but he was quite good. About the same as people say about Paul's lead guitar. George played bass on a few songs that featured Paul McCartney on piano, most likely during the White Album and Abbey Road days. Besides the few times during the Beatles, he played bass on some of his solo work. Most popular of these is Wake Up My Love from Gone Troppo. According to Jeff Emmerich in Here, There and Everywhere, George plays bass and Paul plays piano on the rock and roll music track on the Beatles' For Sale album. George was playing Paul McCartney's violin bass upside down. It can be claimed that this account is valid due to the fact that the bass work is quite simplistic as opposed to the busy bass lines Paul was known to concoct. Also, George claimed to have written the bass part for Drive My Car. As he mentions, for recording, Paul played it on bass and George doubled it on guitar. There were rumors that George Harrison had played the instrument during Paperback Writer. In fact, Harrison was only photographed with the bass, but it wound up being the same instrument he would eventually play on Good Day Sunshine. Reminiscing on the time the band recorded Revolver track She Said, McCartney told many years from now, "I'm not sure, but I think it was one of the only Beatle records I never played on." He continued, "I think we'd had a Barney or something and I said, 'Oh, F you,' and they said, 'Well, we'll do it.'" McCartney said he believed George Harrison played bass instead. While the only source for George playing bass on She Said is Paul's commentary, The Revolver's Deluxe Set, on the outtakes and the book, confirms that Paul plays bass on the backing track. If you listen to She Said backing track, there is a speech before the recording of the song and Paul is very audible. Also, when asked, even Giles Martin, who prepared Revolver 2022 version, confirmed it was Paul. In 1987, George Harrison was interviewed for Cream magazine. George explained why he liked playing the bass. He said, "But I do. I think bass is a good instrument because even without being clever, the part of the bass is really important in the way it holds it all down with the bass drum. I like a bass when it doesn't get in the way of anything. I also like really clever bass like Willie Weeks, who is very clever and funky and versatile but at the same time is very melodic too. So I do like that kind of bass playing, but for my kind of music, bass really just needs to hit the right notes at the right time." During this interview, George also said he plays bass on Old Brown Shoe. He said that everyone thought it was Paul going nuts on bass as usual, but George said he was just playing the same thing on bass that he was doing on the guitar. You can judge for yourself how well he did. Check out its bridge. After the second chorus, he has some really quick bass runs on that. His playing is not as facile as Paul's, obviously. It's more like something George would have played as a guitar lead, using some of his signature fingering motifs. But it suits the song really well. In total, all of the song's elements, including the guitar licks, make a cohesive, exciting whole. This is probably the only song that George composed on piano while a member of the Beatles. He said the piano gave him access to all its keys at once, and so he could play two adjacent notes simultaneously, something that is nearly impossible to do on guitar. You can hear the adjacent notes. It's what gives the song its distinctive flavor, a sort of discordant jazz blues tonal palette. Paul plays piano on the song even though George wrote the piano part. He played 6-string bass on Hey Jude. George also played the 6-string bass on Birthday, Back in the USSR, Golden Slumbers, Honey Pie, and Maxwell's Silver Hammer. During the Let It Be and Abbey Road sessions, the Beatles wanted to try being a live band in the studio, and whenever Paul was playing keyboards, either John or George would have to play bass. The Beatles did get a right-handed Fender jazz bass as part of a gift package from Fender circa 1968. There was a left-handed one in there as well for Paul. That bass was used as a backup during the famous Rock Show concert movie from 1976. Also, there's a video online of Paul McCartney performing Two of Us from the Let It Be album, where Paul is playing acoustic guitar, John is sitting on the floor playing an electric guitar, and George Harrison is playing a bass line on his Rosewood Fender Telecaster. The bass part is actually a great part of the song. Oh Darling appears on the Beatles' 1969 album Abbey Road. It was composed by Paul McCartney but credited to Lennon-McCartney. it is still unclear as to who played the bass on that song. According to Ian MacDonald, the author of the book Revolution in the Head, which provides a song-by-song analysis based on the original Beatles master tapes, the bass was played by Paul. However, in the 2019 box set Abbey Road Super Deluxe version, the accompanying booklet lists an alternative lineup with George Harrison on bass. When listening to the isolated bass track, the sound, the feel, the choice of rhythm and notes do sound like a Paul McCartney performance, but all evidence tends to point in the direction of George having played that bass line. Nevertheless, it is a well-crafted, well-played, and fun bass line to play.
Hello.
That was Ringo, folks.
Well, what can I say?
And goodbye
You
from all
know.
of us.
Well, this is Ringo. Everyone seems to have said everything here, so I'll just sign off by saying cheerio and best of luck from the Beatles.